It's January 2000. The American Super Bowl is in full swing. A Silicon Valley company with $1.2 million of corporate cash burning a hole in its pocket is about to exhibit the dot-com era's most famous sock puppet in an advertisement. Do you remember the company? Pets.com. 10 months and $300 million later, despite the sock puppet being interviewed by People magazine and appearing on Good Morning America, Pets.com is bust. Now, it's obvious to people today that selling cat litter online, making a loss on each sale, and having the heavy, freely shipped cat litter delivered all over America a week later is not a very well thought through business model. I'm sure it's even more obvious to those of you who own a cat and have run out of cat litter. Several days later simply doesn't work. Excited by a new technology, in this case the internet, Pets.com took an existing product. They applied the new technology, and lo and behold, they made an e-commerce site. They completely missed the opportunity to use the new technology to reimagine how their product or service should actually deliver to the customer in the first place. If we are not collectively careful, similar pitfalls await us in the connected home. Intuitively, it seems to me that the connected home simply must be about more than wireless light bulbs and fridges that we can control from our phone. If British industry is to succeed in the connected home, we need a strategy that goes further. Whilst it's clearly impossible to outline a single strategy that will work for all businesses, I'd like to share and discuss three strategic approaches that have worked for Linn as we've looked to incorporate connected home technology into our products, but without losing sight of the ability to redesign them from the first principles of what they should actually be. So number one, to seek to integrate across existing products and services into one new one. Number two, to at all times pursue quality. And number three, to design for the growing global megatrend of personalization. To examine this further, I've split my talk into three brief sections. So first, we'll discuss the history of the audio signal and how these approaches allowed Linn to radically reimagine how audio should actually be delivered to customers. Next, we'll discuss the applicability of these three approaches and how they've been used in other industries. And finally, discuss some of the challenges that existing business structures, government legislation, and societal norms present to reimagination. So first, a brief history of the audio signal path. This picture here shows the audio signal for an LP. Along the top is the production process, and along the bottom, reproduction. For production, the final output of recording is the studio master tape back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when it was done this way. From that studio master, a master LP is cut. And from that master LP, multiple pressings of LPs that go to customers around the world are made. Unfortunately, every one of those stages is lossy, and that's shown by the red arrow there. The master LP is an imperfect copy of the master tape, and each LP pressing is an imperfect copy of the master LP. Fortunately, as long as you didn't snap the vinyl in two, you could ship it anywhere in the world and it would arrive intact, exactly as it was. So the distribution is lossless. And along the bottom, the reproduction process, you have 5 very rigidly separated audio products that still strongly influence how hi-fi is designed and sold today. Turntables that transcribe the mechanical signal held in the vinyl into a very low voltage electrical one. Phonostages that take that tiny voltage and boost it to volts. Preamps that switch between various sources and apply a volume. And power amps that take that volume-controlled signal, make it big enough to drive a speaker. And the speaker, of course, which takes that high voltage, higher current signal and turns it into an acoustic wave that you can hear. There were very good historical reasons for this separation. Integrating these products together in the analog world was detrimental to quality. However, this also led for a tendency for hi-fi companies to specialize in particular products. One company would be known for sources, another for preamps, yet another for power amps, and a final one for speakers. Very few companies made all of these products. And so very few companies understood the entire signal path from the beginning to the end. If we fast forward to the early 80s, here's the picture for CD. Originally a tape, but then later on a file. You take that and you put that on a CD master. That was still a lossy process. You couldn't store everything on the CD master that was in the original tape or file. But the good news is that each pressing, each molding of the CD was an exact copy of that CD master. So there was an improvement there, and there's also no more phonostage, as the CD player could output to the preamp at the right voltage. If we fast forward to the internet era, we have this situation. We've introduced another stage of MP3 compression out of the CD, where we're losing more again. So Linn's first approach to imagination was to look at this portion. And we said if we could eliminate those different stages and instead ship the studio master straight to a new type of player, in this case what we called Linn DS, for the first time you could actually get that studio master file all the way to the home and listen to it as it was designed and recorded. This is more than just a straight application of a network CD player or even a networked MP3 player. It fundamentally increases the value to the customer through an improvement in quality. Initially, you could only get these studio masters from Linn Records, but very quickly other companies came along, HD Tracks in America, Qobuz in Europe, Universal across the world, and later this year, Pono, Neil Young's Pono initiative, which you may have heard of, will be releasing studio masters to the mainstream at large. The second place we looked was at the reproduction process. What possibilities would exist if we could deliver that studio master all the way from the cloud straight to the speaker? Well, Linn launched our exact speakers in 2013, and it turns out that if you're willing to go back to first principles, there's quite a bit that can be done in that area. Inside every traditional speaker is something called a passive crossover. And its responsibility is to take an amplified signal and split it into two signals, in this case for this picture, or as many drive units as you have in a speaker. It could be up to, say, 6. The problem is that each crossover introduces distortion. And the drive units also distort the signal quite substantially as well. To get a visual feel for this, here's a picture, and we'll test everyone's knowledge of electronics, of a square wave. And if we were to pass this square wave through an analog, even an ideal analog to a crossover, what you'd get is this picture. And the yellow is the high-frequency response that would be sent to the tweeter, and the blue is the low-frequency response that would be sent to the woofer. They both go to their respective drive units, be turned into an acoustic wave, and your ear would effectively hear the sum of those two signals. Now, the problem is that all analog filters, even ideal ones, introduce a phase shift, which in this picture, in the time domain, is shown as a delay. And you can see that the blue is delayed from the yellow by roughly 5 milliseconds. And so what your ear hears is this, which is clearly not the square wave that we started with. And this matters. When you listen to a real instrument, a piano, a guitar, a flute, the fundamental note that's played and all of the harmonics at higher frequencies both emanate from the same place and reach your ear at precisely the same time. This isn't happening in a traditional speaker. The good news is that having a connected, intelligent, and software-upgradable speaker, we can fix this. You can take a completely different approach to the crossover and delay the high frequency to line up with the low frequency. And so what we get back is the square wave that we originally wanted. But that's just the crossover. We also spoke that the drive unit itself was a major cause of distortion. Every drive unit is a real-world mechanical device, and so they all vary. Not only do they cause distortion, they all vary in the way that they cause that. You can see that here, where you have the ideal drive unit output and then a measured response in gray of what actually happens for a particular drive unit. Fortunately, connected technology can help out in this area as well. If you very precisely measure the drive unit at manufacture time, and Linn does this in Glasgow, up in Scotland, you can find the exact way that it distorts, and then apply a pre-correction filter for that. And so when you apply the previous picture with this one, what you get back is what you intended to hear without the distorting effects of the drive unit. That's bespoke to that particular drive unit and bespoke to that particular speaker. So it actually changes the way that we ship products to customers. Finally, just like every drive unit is unique, every room that you play music in is unique, and it has a unique impact on the sound that you hear. The size and shape of the room, the position of the speakers, and your listening position will greatly impact what you hear. And this is why in our industry, dealers, whether they're from Linn or from other hi-fi companies, would spend a lot of time with their dealers finding ways to optimize the position of where the speakers go in the room, to find the ideal position for them in the room. Now the problem is that, well, that might be the ideal position for them from an acoustic perspective. Certain members of the family may not be terribly happy with that ideal position. They may wish them further against the wall, more in the corners, all of which are very non-ideal from a music perspective. So what to do? You can, a couple things. First, that's the ideal speaker position. And the good news is that with connected technology in the speaker, you can actually tell the speaker to emulate the ideal position in that practical position. Further, if we go back, sound waves interact in the room. They create peaks and troughs through constructive and destructive interference. And those peaks will sound artificially louder, and the troughs artificially quieter. But that's not the most significant problem. The problem is the peaks particularly will mask music that comes after them because they have a higher amount of energy in the signal and it takes longer to decay than it should have. Again, software can identify those in the room and you can reduce the peaks at those points, reduce the energy in the signal to counteract the distorting influence of the room. There's a substantial amount that can be done in the connected home in music. Connected technology has driven intelligent computing further and further into traditional widgets. Through that process, it's allowed Linn to integrate multiple products across the hi-fi system into just the speaker. It's dramatically improved quality, and it's allowed for extensive customer personalization, both at manufacturing and actually in their home. Of course, the connected home is about a lot more than just music and entertainment. Here's a couple of ideas that I've come across that I think exhibit these same three traits or approaches. The home safety and security market is quite intriguing with respect to this. The direct application, without thinking too much, would be a Wi-Fi lock that you could use from your phone. Reimagine requires that we go much further. Some of the challenges of locks are that getting a key to your friend, or the actual physical security issues of giving a key to a tradesman or a cleaner, and the concern that they would be able to copy it. An intelligent lock that could accept one-time codes actually takes this process much further. It both improves security and allows for much easier personalization about who can get into the home at different points. Second, we all know through reading the papers that the cost of healthcare and providing that to people is rapidly rising. My father has a lot of problems with his feet. He can be quite a bit of pain at points. And he's been to a number of podiatrists over the years, but there's been relatively little that they've been able to do for him. And this is partly because they can only see him for a half hour or so every couple of months. What about a pair of slippers that he could wear around the house? It would sense how he's walking, where the pressure points are, how he goes about a day, what happens as he changes his activities. Such a slipper, plus the associated intelligence and software, would integrate existing labor-intensive services and free up NHS staff from having to record data and move towards the interpretation of it. It also significantly enhances the quality of the data that the podiatrist would get. So this was a very interesting application. And finally, just like all good healthcare, it's inherently personalized. Reimagination as a concept is really not rocket science. Why is it, lots of people have ideas about it, many people want to pursue it. What is it that prevents them from doing so? I reckon there is a couple of issues that do so. The first is existing business structures. It's definitely more difficult to get funding for a product that doesn't exist, if the category doesn't even exist. this seems to stress out a lot of decision makers, both whether they be in VCs, big companies, small companies, seed funding. If you can't buy market research to say how big the potential market for the product is, it definitely stresses people out. If we are going to encourage a culture of being first to market with new and radical and changing ideas, we're simply going to have to sort this out in British industry. Further, a corporate structure itself can inhibit reimagination. As we're saying, reimagination requires a wide-ranging area of engineering expertise. Like the hi-fi industry, many companies and departments inside of companies are structured along functional basis. And so you'll have software and then on-device software, cloud software, and then you'll have electronics and mechanical separated from that. It is very difficult for those different groups to structurally consider, let alone implement ideas that require deep integration across the groups if they're structured that way. Further, in a number of industries, I've been told and been discussing with people that government legislation actually prevents companies from looking at integration. Imagine that legislation required that the hi-fi industry had sources and preamps and power amps and speakers. It sounds crazy, but it clearly would not have allowed Linn to do exact. But this is precisely the situation in many aspects of the health and finance industries. I'm sure there are many good historical reasons for that rigid separation. But we in government need to be clear that if there's any legislative separation, we're inherently preventing integration and therefore reimagination. That's not to say that government shouldn't be involved at all. I think there's a really crucial area that whilst relaxing the rules that prevent integration, governments also need to set clear rules, guidelines really, that would foster a culture of ownership of data and an understanding in society of who owns the data that's collected by devices in the home. Data ownership and what companies can do with it is, in my mind, the most significant issue facing the connected home in the next 10 years. I'd love to see government get ahead of this issue rather than chase it. Finally, cultural inertia or social inertia really shouldn't be underestimated. You may have made it through the gauntlet of internal and external funding. You may have made it through the gauntlet of government legislation, only to find that your customers simply don't understand the product that you're giving them. It's too different from what exists today. Don't underestimate the amount of marketing that you will need to do to successfully explain your new product to customers. So, in summary, we've looked at the history of the audio signal path and the rigidly segmented audio products that it fostered. We then discussed how an approach of seeking to integrate multiple existing products or services, depending on your industry, into one new one, pursuing quality at all points, and designing for the global megatrend of personalization, that when you combine those three approaches with new connected home technology, it allowed Linn to reimagine the music playback system, and it can be done in other areas as well. We then discussed a couple of examples from other areas of industry that exhibited these same three approaches, and we considered the challenges that existing business structures, government legislation, and social inertia would bring to reimagination in the connected home. Thank you.